I know y'all tripping. Y'all like two weeks in a row. Yeah, because if you remember on my October 1st video podcast I did, which was my next to last video podcast before the one I did a week ago today, I had said, moving forward, I'm no longer going to be doing, like between roughly April of 2017 and August of this year, 2020, I had done a rough average of about 8 to 10 videos per month. 8 to 10 videos per month. But then, again, as I mentioned on the October 1st video, I said I was no longer going to do 8 to 10 videos per month. I'm going to be doing more like 1 to 3 videos a month on YouTube. Now, on Patreon, I might do a little bit more than that. But on YouTube, yeah, moving forward, I'm probably going to average about 1 to 3 videos a month. There's about roughly 3 things I want to talk about in today's video. One of them is sad news. Sad news. And that would be the passing of famed direct verbal game dating coach David X. David X passed away roughly about 4 to 5 weeks ago. Actually, I've known about it for at least minimum 3 weeks, if not 4 weeks. But his family had asked that I did not mention it publicly. But yeah, he passed away. I think it was like 5 weeks ago when David X passed away. If you're listening to this video and you're like, who is David X? When I first came on the scene in the manosphere, as you know, I always talk about there's different types of game. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of that word, but just for the heck of a game. There's different forms. The 2 biggest general forms of game is verbal game versus nonverbal game. Verbal game versus nonverbal game. I've always said the 3 main general types of nonverbal game would be looks game, when you basically are able to pull women just on the aesthetic appeal of your face and or your physique. That's known as looks game. Second form of nonverbal game would be what's known as masculine energy game or sub-communication. That's a word a lot of conventional PUAs use, sub-communication. That basically means you're able to let women know that you find them physically and sexually attractive without specifically verbalizing it. And that's when you're able to pull women just on the way you carry yourself, your demeanor, your disposition, your eye contact, the way you might touch a woman if you're close enough to touch her. All that falls under masculine energy game or / sub-communication. Then the third type of nonverbal game would simply be money and status game. If you're pulling women simply because you have a high degree of career success and financial success, then that means you're pulling women in what's known as money and status game. So those are 3 primary forms of nonverbal game. Again, it's looks game, masculine energy / sub-communication game, and money and status game. Then on the verbal side, the 2 main forms of verbal game is direct verbal game and indirect verbal game. Direct verbal game and indirect verbal game. When I first came on the scene in what's now known as the manosphere, somewhere between 1999 and 2001. That's when I first started posting on certain message boards and discussion forums and blog sites. Because my book came out, my first ebook came out in May of 1999. May of 1999 was when I dropped my first ebook on the internet. Mode 1, let the women know what you're really thinking. And so I was probably the only guy when I first got on the internet who was emphasizing direct verbal game. Pretty much everybody else who was associated with the manosphere, they were promoting some form, some variation of indirect verbal game. They were promoting some variation of indirect verbal game. The first guy I heard about in the early to mid 2000s who was also promoting direct verbal game was David X. Yeah, David X was probably the most well-known Caucasian guy in the manosphere who was known for promoting direct verbal game. Pretty much everybody else was promoting indirect verbal game. So, yeah, for a number of years, I would say starting with like 2004, 2005, all the way up until, I don't know, about 2009, 2010, 2011, me and David X were considered the top two guys to go to for direct verbal game advice. For direct verbal game advice. Everybody else was given some form of indirect verbal game advice. And next claim to fame of David X was I interviewed him, set a record 7 times on my Blog Talk Radio show. That's more than any other individual host. I interviewed him more times than any other individual host when I did my Blog Talk Radio show from 2007 to 2000. I did my Blog Talk Radio show from 2007, June of 2007 to mid-June of 2016. 9 years. And yeah, in them 9 years, he was my most frequently interviewed guest. And I got a chance to meet him in London. We spoke together in London. We were the 2 featured speakers for a weekend conference for single heterosexual men called the Direct Dating Summit, which was financed by a former Caucasian PUA named Sasha Daygame. Yeah. And so that was you could say, the long-awaited meeting of the 2 direct verbal game titans in the manosphere. It's like a lot of people showed up to that event just to see me and David X in the same place at the same time. Because, yeah, it was like this highly anticipated meeting. Because for a number of years leading up to that, because that event happened in November of 2010. So again, starting with as early as 2004, whenever people talked about direct verbal game, the 2 names you always heard people mention was Alan Roger Currie and David X. Alan Roger Currie and David X. Those were the 2 names you heard in the manosphere related to direct verbal game. Was Alan Roger Currie and David X. And yeah, we finally got to meet each other. We hung out in London as well as Amsterdam. I hung out with David X in Amsterdam. Real cool guy. Real cool guy. And so, yeah, it's interesting. He's one of the few guys in the manosphere I've met in person. Because probably 90% of people associated with the manosphere, I only know them through the internet, particularly black people. I've only, when it comes specifically to black people, the only black people I've met in person that are associated with the manosphere, either the worldwide manosphere or what's otherwise known as the white manosphere or the black manosphere, would be Donovan Sharp. I met him at the 21 convention in October of 2018. So we've been around each other in person before. Who else black that's associated with the manosphere that I've met in person? Well, a lot of you guys might not be familiar with this guy. Ed Lattimore, who I also met at that same 21 convention. He's not as well known as some other guys. He's a former boxer, named Ed Lattimore. I met him because, me, him, and Donovan were the 3 black speakers at the 2018 21 convention. As most of you know, I was actually the first black speaker the 21 convention ever had in 2017. Yeah, I was the first black speaker they ever had. I want to say that's it. I'm trying to think of somebody else I might have met in person. Black, specifically black. Now, the person I've known the longest through the internet is Ron Wills on the black side. Yeah, me and Ron Wills first connected through email in either September or October of 2001, a little over 2 years after I dropped my first ebook. Yeah, I actually sought him out. Ron Wills, I've told this story a half a dozen times, but Ron Wills, I was at a point where I wanted to convert my ebook into a paperback. And Ron, at the time, was one of the few black guys who had a self-published, as opposed to traditionally published, who had a self-published self-help paperback. So, yeah, I picked his brain on, because see, I've said this before, like now, in the year 2020, it's easy to get both an ebook and a paper book published. It ain't really no challenge to it, particularly financially. It's relatively cheap. Whereas back in the 80s, 90s, and even early to mid 2000s, it was expensive. If you wanted to self-publish a paperback or a hardcover, it was expensive. Well, depending on your definition of expensive. My definition might be different. For me, I'll say this, I'll just speak for myself. If I was going to have to pay over $1,000 to get a book self-published, that was expensive to me. Now, for somebody who's making a lot of money, they'd be like, oh, $1,000, that ain't much money. That was expensive. I couldn't afford to pay over $1,000 to self-publish a book. I could barely, in 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, I could barely afford to pay $500 to self-publish a book. So let alone 1,000. But anyway, Rom is the person I've known the longest black person associated with the manosphere. I've been familiar with Rom, again, since either September or October of 2001. The longest person I've been associated with, period, I would say Ross Jeffries. Ross Jeffries was the first person I had contact with in the manosphere on a non-black person was Ross Jeffries. He was probably the first premier, well-known white PUA. You can almost say he was the one who technically started the whole PUA craze, was Ross Jeffries. Yeah, because Ross Jeffries, he's been around since about like 1995, 1996. I think I first exchanged an email with him in either 1998 or 1999. Yeah. So Ross Jeffries is the first person that I've known the longest. But yeah, David X is the first person I met in person. Yeah, the first person associated with Manosphere I met in person was Sasha Daygame, David X, number of London-based PUA dating coach type people. Yeah, most of the first people I met in person were people who were based in London/Europe. Yeah, because I before that event in London, I don't think I met any white PUAs here in the United States in person. I was familiar with a handful over the internet, but in person, I hadn't met anybody yet. Matter of fact, yeah, in general though, I've met more white people associated, or I should say non-black people. I've met more non-black people associated with the worldwide manosphere in person than I have black people. Like I said, the only two black people I've met in person up to this point is Donovan Sharp and Ed Lattimore. So anyway, yeah. Now, there was something, speaking of London and speaking of David X, and this is going to segue me into my next point for this video. David X said something the second day of the conference in London that I've repeated multiple times to my followers, supporters, clients, whatever. And this issue came up in the last 3 days, starting with Saturday up until now. It came up again, and it's a major pet peeve of mine as a dating coach. Major pet peeve of mine as a dating coach. When we spoke in London together, David X and I, he said, it was a 2-day conference. It was Saturday and Sunday, and this was on that Sunday. One of the things David X said, he said, this is a great conference for you, man. It was about 350 guys in the audience of the auditorium we were at in London. And he told the guys, he said, this is a great conference. You're being exposed to a lot of different speakers, specifically a lot of different dating coaches / PUAs. But he said, here is my recommendation for you moving forward. Here's my recommendation for you moving forward. He said, what you should do this weekend is listen to everybody. And then after you listen to everybody, decide whose advice and area of expertise resonates with you the most. Whose advice, knowledge, wisdom, insight, advice, and area of expertise resonates with you the most, and then just follow that person. Just follow that person. Because he said, I know from experience, he said, if you guys choose to follow multiple people at the same time, it's going to leave you nothing but confused and frustrated. Confused and frustrated. And I can say as a dating coach of 2 decades, this is one of my few times, I think this might be on my second time saying this on a YouTube video, but I've said this at least a half a dozen times on my Patreon exclusive videos. I'm just saying it bluntly, man. I don't like clients and supporters of mine who regularly are following 2 or more dating coaches at the same time. Don't like the shit. Just flat out. Don't like it. Why? Number one, to me, I had so many thoughts, but for time, I'm going to be editing out a lot of things I wanted to say on this particular point. But here's the thing, man. Well, first I'll start out telling you the only time it's okay to follow 2 or more dating coaches. This is what I'll start off. Here's the number one time I would say it's okay to follow 2 or more self-help advisors. That's what, instead of specifically saying dating coach, I'll just say self-help advisors. The number one time it's okay to follow 2 or more self-help advisors at the same time is if they have different areas of expertise. If you're following me for verbal communications and conversation skills advice, and then you're following somebody else for, say, something to do with health and fitness, or something to do with personal hygiene and grooming, or something to do with financial management, or something to do with career success, or education, or, whatever, how to handle a divorce, basically some other area of expertise that I don't emphasize, I don't have a problem with that. That's why I would say I don't have a problem with a guy following me and other people. Here's where I have a problem with you following me and another dating coach, or I said another self-help guru. If you're following 3 self-help gurus and say all 3 of them are emphasizing conversations, interpersonal communication skills, conversation skills, verbal communication skills, verbal seduction, you fucking up. Blunt talk, you fucking up. And this is what David X expressed in London. Because here's the reason. You lose either way. Here's the thing. Let's say you following me and another guy, and you feel like we're giving pretty much the exact same advice, which is unlikely. But let's say for argument's sake, we're giving the exact same advice. Why are you following 2 people that are giving the exact same advice? Because 9 times out of 10, one person is copying off of the other person. Because I can tell you right now, man, nobody should be capable of giving the exact same advice to me because they haven't lived my life. They haven't lived the life of a 57-year-old black man. So by that nature, you shouldn't be able to give the exact. You might be able to have certain areas of your advice that might be similar to mine, but if your advice is pretty much exactly like mine, that means you're copying my shit. And you shouldn't be. Because you haven't lived my life. If you're not a black man, you're not 57 years old, you ain't lived my life. So nothing about your advice should sound exactly like mine. If you in your 20s, 30s, 40s, you don't know. You ain't lived my life, man. You ain't lived my life. Real talk. You ain't lived my life. So when it comes to the subject of following two or more self-help gurus at the same time, number one, if two or more self-help gurus sound just alike, why are you following two or more self-help gurus? Why? If 100% of what one self-help guru says sounds exactly like 100% of what the other guru says, one of those two is copying off of the other. Because ain't no two men lived the exact same life. They don't have the exact same experiences with women. Like my own blood brother, my own older brother, Steven. I'm closer to him than any man on earth. We've had some experiences that are similar in many ways, but our experiences with women haven't been exactly alike. So therefore, my brother's knowledge, wisdom, insight, and advice will never sound exactly like mine because he hasn't had the experiences that I've had. And I haven't had some of the experiences that he's had. And here's an even bigger issue. If you're following two or more self-help gurus, and let's say, percentage-wise, let's say 60% of their advice is similar to each other. 60% of their advice is very similar to each other, if not exactly the same. But let's say the remaining 40% of each of their advice is totally different. See, that's going to, as David X said in London, that's going to leave you confused and frustrated. Because you're going to be like, well, when it comes to issue ABC or scenario XYZ, whose advice should I follow? Because they're giving me two different advices. Like, I give you a classic example. I'm going to have to bring up you-know-whose name. Alpha Male Strategies. Everybody knows that Alpha Male Strategies bit off a lot of my talking points from my book, The Possibility of Sex, which is now called, the updated version is called No Free Attention. Everybody knows that. It's like common knowledge in the manosphere now. So, in the same way I tell men to limit women's access to your non-sexual time, attention, and companionship, starting with 2018, Alpha Male Strategies has essentially told his followers and supporters the same thing. But here's the difference. See, here's where we separate. That's where we're similar, but here's where we separate. Alpha Male Strategies encourages men to go on as many as 2, 3, 4 dates with a woman in an attempt to have casual sex with them. I don't go on dates with women to have casual sex. And I tell my clients, you don't need to go on no fucking dates to have casual sex with women. Now, if you're looking to hook up with a woman, if you've identified a woman as potential long-term girlfriend material or future wife material, that's when I've always said it's okay to go on multiple dates with a woman. Because the purpose of a date is basically to identify and establish your non-sexual chemistry with a woman. That's the whole purpose of a date. The whole purpose of a date, without getting lengthy in detail, in simple terms, the whole purpose of going out on dates with women is to establish if you and that woman have above average to exceptional non-sexual chemistry. Non-sexual chemistry. If you're looking at a woman as a fuck buddy, I don't know what your all's definition of a fuck buddy, but a fuck buddy is a woman that you only spend time with just to fuck. Like, at least for me, I'll speak for myself. When I have a fuck buddy, I only hook up with her to fuck. I don't go to the movies with them. I don't have lunch or dinner with them. I don't sit on the phone, listen to them talk about their day at work. I don't do none of that shit. I call them up when I'm horny, or they call me up when they're horny. We hook up, we fuck, and then we don't speak again until we ready to fuck again. That's a fuck buddy. Anything else is either a friends with benefits partner. Friends with benefits partner, you can spend time with both sexually and non-sexually. Polyamorous lover, you're going to spend time with both sexually and non-sexually. A girlfriend, you're going to spend time with both sexually and non-sexually. A fiance, you're going to spend time with her both sexually and non-sexually. A wife, obviously, you're going to spend time with her both sexually and anybody you plan on spending time with both sexually and non-sexually, that's when I would say it's okay to go out on dates with women. But if 95 to 99% of the time you're going to be spending with a woman is just to fuck, why the fuck you going out on a date? Dude, do you know since the age of 22 up until now, I'm 57, when it comes to women that I identified as just me wanting to have casual sex with them, I'm never going out on a date. Not even one time. Never. And that's facts. I'm never going out on a date. Never going on a breakfast date, lunch date, dinner. I ain't never going out on a date with a woman. Don't need to. I got an extraordinary mouthpiece. I talk dirty to women, get their pussy wet, fuck them. Repeat. Talk dirty to them, get their pussy wet, they beg me to fuck them, I fuck them, repeat. That's Al Currie's MO. Mo 1. Speaking of dates, this is what got me riled up. In case you're wondering, like, dang, why is ARC so riled up? It started with my Patreon live stream. You know, normally, man, that's usually where I least get riled up, is when I'm dealing with my Patreon subscribers. Because I got a lot of love for my Patreon subscribers. I rarely, harshly admonish or criticize my Patreon subscribers. But I was doing my Patreon live stream this past Saturday, and I had a guy who was guilty of doing what I just talked about. He admitted that he's following, like, I think at minimum 3 different dating coaches. And he said, Alan, because what I just talked about, I was talking about during the live stream. I'm basically saying that when I look at a woman as a fuck buddy, I don't go on dates. I don't ask women out on dates when I know I just want 1 or more episodes of short-term, non-monogamous casual sex. I never, ever, ever go out on a date with a woman if I look at her as just fuck buddy material. I don't go on no dates. And so one of my Patreon subscribers in the chat room, he said, Alan, he said, I understand that's how you feel and that's what you promote, but I had 2 other dating coaches that when I asked them, when I told them about basically your attitude, their response was, well, with all due respect to Alan, the main reason why you should always go on at least 2 or 3 dates, at bare minimum 1 date with a woman, is to establish that you're not some type of weird, psychotic creep who has the potential to physically harm them or sexually assault them. Insert dog face here. Bless my Patreon subscriber's heart. I don't want to maliciously attack him because I know he had good intentions. But I already kind of admonished him during the live stream. But this is what I'm going to say to anybody who wants to co-sign with the response those other 2 dating coaches gave him. So I got 2 words for you. Date rape. Why the fuck you think the concept of date rape was popularized in the mid to late 1990s? Why do you think? See, if you're a young person, you may not know this. Before the 1990s, there was no such thing as date rape. I mentioned that in a few videos before. There was no such thing as date rape. There was just regular rape, conventional rape. But there was no such thing as acquaintance rape or date rape. Or I'm not going to say there was no such thing as it. I don't want to suggest that it didn't happen, but it was not a subject of discussion, particularly among those in the legal field. Like, in other words, it wasn't punishable. It wasn't really punishable as a crime. Like, I tell you straight up, when I was in college, I know a lot of guys, including, honestly, some of my own frat brothers, that date, by today's definition, date rape women. Like, for example, if you get a woman sloppy drunk and then you proceed to have sex with her and you didn't really get any verbal consent from her, that's date rape. See, in 1982, 1983, 1984, that wasn't date rape. That wasn't called date rape. But in today, that's date rape. You could go to prison for that shit. You could go to prison for that. Don't believe me? Try it. Get a woman sloppy drunk, then fuck her, and see if that woman doesn't potentially charge you with date rape. That's date rape. By today's standards, legal standards, that's date rape. All that to say this. The reason why, as you know, there's a woman who I've interviewed before on Blog Talk Radio and I collaborated with in just recent months by the name of Katie Costner. One of the reasons why Katie Costner, when she ended up on the cover of Time magazine, you could say she was arguably the first woman to really make a big stink about date rape and make it a national discussion to the point where a lot of laws were modified and changed. But one of her early messages about the whole reason why she promoted the concept of date rape is related to that response those two dating coaches get. She basically wanted to let women know that just because you go out on 2 dates with a guy, 3 dates with a guy, 4 dates, 5 dates, doesn't mean he's safe, doesn't mean he won't physically harm you or sexually assault you. And I know that even as a man. Shit, y'all heard of Ted Bundy? One of the most nation's serial killers? A lot of the women that he brutally murdered, he went out on 1, 2, 3, 4 dates with them before he brutally murdered them. Dates don't mean shit in terms of confirming that you're a non-violent person who won't commit any form of sexual assault. Dates don't mean shit in that regard. They don't mean shit. Dates don't mean shit. So as far as with all due respect to those 2 other dating coaches who said, if no other reason, the reason you should go out on at least 1, 2, or 3 dates is to make a woman trust you more, trust that you're not a weird. Dates don't. If you know anything about the nature of psychopaths and sociopaths, particularly psychopaths, really both psychopaths and sociopaths, but particularly of the 2 psychopaths know how to basically, in layman's terms, act normal for a number of days, weeks, months, or years. They know how to pretend as if they're a normal, sane, emotionally well-adjusted person. And then they just have moments where they snap. Now, sociopaths are similar to psychopaths, but they're a little different. Sociopaths, the main thing with them, they have no sense of like empathy, sympathy, or emotional attachment. That's part of the characteristics of being a sociopath. Sociopaths have no sense of empathy, sympathy, or emotional attachment or regret. They don't have none of that shit. Emotional empathy, they don't have that. They're almost like the human equivalent to an insect or a rabid animal. So without getting lengthy on that, man, dates don't mean shit. Again, I ain't never went on a date for casual sex, ever. I ain't never went on a date with a woman that I knew I just wanted to have casual sex with. The only woman in my life I've ever gone out on a date with was a woman that I looked at as a potential long-term girlfriend and or a future wife. Yeah, man, I don't go on, definitely, man, if I look at a woman, again, as just casual fuck, but I never invite no woman, I don't know, lunch date, dinner date, walk in the park, drinks at a bar, none of that shit. I don't do none of that shit. I did a Patreon exclusive video about this called Blurring the Lines. I don't like to blur the lines, man. I don't like to blur the lines. I don't want a woman to even think I don't want her to even have the delusional, optimistic hope that she could someday become my girlfriend or wife. I lay that shit out up front. I've literally told women verbatim to their face, I'll say, you have a 0% chance of ever becoming my long-term girlfriend or my wife. 0% chance. And I've still casually fucked hundreds of women. So for all those guys who say, oh, if you're that brutally straightforward, then you're not really going to have any success getting women in bed. I've fucked hundreds of women. Not dozens, hundreds. Since my early 20s. Hundreds. So don't tell me you can't be successful getting women in bed by being brutally, straightforwardly honest with them. That's a damn lie. And anybody who knows me in real life knows that's a damn lie. It's a damn lie. Damn lie. So, recap and bottom line, I am not a fan of people. Like, I had a consultation just earlier today on the side door. I had a consultation earlier today with a guy. I ain't gonna go into too much detail, but he irritated me in that regard. There was a guy earlier today, just earlier before I started recording this video, I was doing a consultation with, and he was bringing up advice from other dating coaches. Dude, again, man, the only time you should be following 2 or more self-help gurus is if they got uniquely different areas of expertise. But if you're following 2 or more self-help gurus that generally have the same area of expertise, I'm guaranteeing you 90 to 99% chance at some point they're going to say something that's going to be contradictory to the other. Anytime you follow 2 or more self-help gurus, it's inevitable that they're going to give some advice. Like, I know even people who I like them and respect them as self-help gurus that I know for a fact give advice that's starkly different than mine. That's starkly different from mine. And it should be different because, again, when you're following advice of a self-help guru, all of his advice should represent his experiences. And if you remember, I did a video way back in 2017 where I said, I study people, man. I'm a keen observer of people. I can tell who's giving genuine, authentic advice versus bullshit advice. See, there's a lot of people that give advice that are not based on their own experiences. They give advice that are based on other people's experiences, other dating coaches' experiences, some of their friends and relatives' experiences. They ain't giving advice based on shit that they themselves have experienced. I remember one time, a few years ago, I heard a guy, I talked about this in a video before, there was a guy giving advice on how to have a threesome, a menage a trois, even though he admitted, and I give him points for honesty, he admitted that he had never had a threesome. He admitted that he himself had never had a threesome. He was giving advice based on, I think, his best friend, I want to say. Either his best friend or brother or cousin, something like that. But yeah, see, if you ain't had a threesome, why the fuck you giving advice on a threesome? Why? 95 to 99% of the advice I give to men is based on things that I've experienced. There might be a small percentage of stuff that I might not necessarily have direct experience, particularly when I give advice related to, well, now that I'm married, I do have experience. But I was going to say, if there's one type of advice I've given guys over the years that I didn't experience myself, was marriage-related advice. So I admit that. I've given some guys occasionally marriage-related advice, even though at the time I had never been married myself. But I say at minimum, no less than 95% of the advice I give men is based on my own experiences. And that's the reason why, to me, no 2 people should ever sound alike. Because ain't no 2 men had the exact same experience. They might have had somewhat similar experiences, but they ain't had the exact same experiences. They had it, specifically with me, and this is where I got to bring up my nickname, the king of verbal seduction. When it comes specifically to the area of verbal seduction, I'm sorry, man. This is where I got to let my ego come out. To me, it ain't another dating coach or PUA walking this earth who's on my level when it comes to verbal seduction. Sorry. You can quote me on that. Ain't nobody on my level in that area, man. Talking dirty to a woman, getting a woman's pussy wet within 5 to 10 minutes after you meet them, ain't nobody on my level in that area. Because if they were on my level or they were on a higher level than me, they would have a book that's selling better than me that deals with verbal seduction. Name somebody who does. Name somebody who does. I ain't never met a motherfucker in the manosphere, both through the internet or in person, who was a better motherfucker than me, and specifically with the skill of the combination of straightforward honesty combined with seductive, erotic, dirty talk. When it comes to the combination of those 2 things together, I ain't never met a motherfucker in the manosphere better than me. You call me egotistical, full of myself, I don't care. I ain't never met a motherfucker better than me. So anyway, yeah, man, that's just bad news, man. Don't follow. Again, David X, I give him credit. He was the first one who said that. David X was the first one who said it. He said that again in London in November of 2010. David X said, you should never, ever, long-term follow two or more dating coaches or two or more PUAs, because he basically said it's inevitable that at some point they're going to give contradictory advice. And that's how I feel. It's inevitable. And again, in the 1% chance that they never contradict each other and their advice is always exactly the same, then like I already said, then that means one person is copying off of the other person. That means one person is blatantly copying off of the other person. Blatantly copying off of the other person. Speaking of blatant copycats, a lot of people have been asking me, Alan, what's your new book? I love the book, but I'm curious why you changed the name. Because people were blatantly copying my No Free Attention. Go to Google, put in No Free Attention. Who's the first hit that comes up? Me. Before I came on YouTube in 2017, wasn't nobody talking about No Free Attention. Show me a video timestamped before April 2017 where somebody was talking about No Free Attention. And even more maximum before 2012 that was talking about No Free Attention. I've been promoting No Free Attention since, as I say in the book, since 1988. 1988. Since the age of the internet, since about 99, 2000. And in book form since 2012 when Possibility of Sex came out. Show me a timestamp documented evidence that somebody was talking about using a specific phrase, no free attention, before me. Show me. Timestamped. Got to be timestamped. If it ain't timestamped, don't tell me about your uncle in Kansas like somebody did recently on my community page. I don't give a fuck. With all due respect to your uncle, I don't give a fuck. If he ain't got nothing copyrighted and or timestamped, don't give a fuck. Real talk. Don't give a fuck. I'm tired of people writing me these little notes saying, well, Alan, with all due respect to you, I had my grandfather, he actually, one time in the basement at his house, he used the no free attention. Man, no, I know you love your grandfather. With all due respect to your grandfather, I don't give a fuck. Show me something copyrighted and or time-stamped, and then we can talk. That's the reason why I changed my book, my updated version. No, I was tired of people. Some people have borrowed No Free Attention and given me shout outs and proper credit attribution, which I appreciate. But there's been other people, and I could call them out by name, but I'm not. There's been other people who've used that like they ain't mentioned my name at all. So, as one follower told me, he said, this was your copycat revenge. You damn right. Me modifying my title was kind of a form of revenge against all my copycats. No Free Attention. That's Alan Roger Currie shit. I popularized that phrase. Particularly when starting with the advent of the internet. I popularized that phrase. But yeah, I've been getting a lot of great feedback on my book. Some guys have actually said they feel like No Free Attention is actually better than the original. Now, I've heard that from at least a half a dozen guys already. A lot of guys say, Alan, I love The Possibility of Sex, but your new version called No Free Attention. Here's what a lot of guys say, and I'll wrap up on this. A lot of guys said, Alan, more than any other book, after reading No Free Attention, I now 100% understand why you're all about Mode 1. Before reading this book, I kind of sort of knew why you were all about Mode 1 as opposed to variations of indirect verbal game. But after reading No Free Attention, it solidified in my mind why you, because I've always said there's some coaches, dating coaches that will emphasize indirect verbal game, some that exclusively emphasize direct verbal game, and some that kind of go back and forth between the two. I've always been hardcore direct verbal game. I don't leave no room for indirect verbal game. And I've had a lot of guys say it wasn't until they read No Free Attention that in a nutshell, without getting late, it's as simple as this. And I've said this before, and people have tried to call me intellectually dishonest. But I remember a couple months ago, I was on a live stream and I said, Mode 1 is really not about getting laid. That's not the primary purpose of Mode 1. And like I said, oh, get out of here. That is, Mode 1 is nothing more than how to get laid. But I've had a lot of guys just in the last couple weeks, they said, Alan, one thing I realized from reading No Free Attention is that Mode 1 is more about how not to get played than it is about how to get laid. You see how that rhymes? It's more about how not to get played than it is about how to get laid. Now, in general, I'd probably say it's about both. But if I had to lean towards one or the other, Mode 1 is more about not wasting time and money with the women who are not interested in having sex with you than it is about identifying the women who are interested in having sex with you. That's the thing. Mode 1 is more about identifying the women who are not interested in having sex with you, but are trying to give you the misleading impression that they are, i.e. manipulative time wasters, versus identifying the women who definitely aren't interested in having sex with you, which would be reciprocators. God bless the soul of David X. He was a great man. I enjoyed the time I spent with him. He had a lot of knowledge, wisdom, and insight to offer to men. And his presence in the manosphere will be sorely missed.